The supreme importance of commercial interests should frankly be recognized, and the division between the section devoted primarily to business and that to pleasure would come at East Street. The foot of D Street would be emphasized by the development of a Bay Plaza, but the main development of recreation and artistic interests would be centered at the foot of Elm Streets, near the residential sections in the city park. The people of San Diego will do well if they recognize today the two great central recreation features of the city, now and always, are the city park of 1,400 acres and the bayfront, and that the value of both will be increased many-fold if a suitable link, parkway or boulevard, can be developed, bringing them into direct and pleasant relation. The Paseo, a pleasant promenade, an airing place, a formal and dignified approach to the big central park, free from grade railroad crossings. In itself, the Paseo might possess great beauty, each block offering an opportunity for special design, and yet the whole strip brought into harmony and unity. Formal flower beds, pergolas, terraces would appear block to block, and from the city park to the bay, the cheerful and enlivening influence of water and jets, basins, and cascades would give the final touch of beauty.
Another key element of the City Beautiful movement and Nolen's plan was the development of a street and thoroughfares program that created a hierarchy of development.
Different streets have as different functions as different buildings. Unless they are carefully located and designed to fulfill these various functions, there must inevitably be incalculable loss and waste. We have curved streets where they should be straight where they should be curved, narrow where they should be broad, occasionally broad where they should be narrow, and no street connection at all where one is imperatively needed. We have streets at too frequent intervals, and streets too far apart. Illustrations could readily be given of each of these mistakes in street planning.
Nolen goes on to identify key streets and his recommended improvements, with a particular emphasis on D Street, now called Broadway, for the Bay to Civic Center and Plaza link. He also goes on to recommend the changing of the street names for identity purposes.
Few cities in the United States have a more romantic history and situation than San Diego, and it is to be regretted that they have not expressed themselves in the street names. Instead of D Street and 5th Street, and similar colorless names, we might honor the discoverer of the Bay, the sturdy fathers who established the missions, the pioneers in settling the modern city, the heroines of its romances which have become part of our literature. Or we might give some recognition to the topographical situation of certain streets, especially as they express themselves in the soft words of the Spanish language.
Nolen's next recommendations clearly exemplifies his City Beautiful design orientation, the creation of a system of parks, which include both major parks, playgrounds, and open space.
San Diego early expressed its belief in parks by setting aside close to the center of town 1,400 acres of natural canyon and mesa as the city park. This great reservation for the people was secured by a simple resolution introduced into the city council. But in a city like San Diego, stretching for more than 20 miles up and down the coast, with an almost infinite variety of scenery, no single park is sufficient. A system of parks is unquestionably demanded. Such a system of parks can be secured more easily than in any other city I know of. It should include characteristic, inexpensive, almost ready-made parks in every part of the city, and form a unique series of pleasure grounds.
Nolen goes on to describe an extensive program that focuses on the city park, later known as Balboa Park, the Bayfront, now identified as the Embarcadero, Point Loma, which became Cabrillo National Monument, the beach reservation located in today's communities of Mission Beach, Pacific Beach, Ocean Beach, and La Jolla. Nolen also describes Soledad Mountain, Mission Cliff, Fort Stockton, and Torrey Pines as possible park locations. Nolen also recommended the preservation of canyons and mesas throughout San Diego, Mission Valley as open space, Mission San Diego de Acala and Old Town for its historic significance, and the development of neighborhood parks and playgrounds. Nolen's plan concepts were initially enthusiastically supported by the community, but became derailed by the new focus to hold an exposition to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal in the city park, and later the politics of how the city should be developed, as exemplified in the bitter mayoral fight between George Marston and Lewis Wilde, known as the Battle of Smokestacks versus Geraniums. This became the beginning of the politics of planning our city.
Well, even though Marston was not succeeding as he had in mind for the fairgrounds, he did press ahead with trying to get the Nolen plan implemented from 1908. So he ran for mayor in 1913 and was hoping that he would be the #1 policy that he was going to push was implementing the Nolen plan. Well, he lost the election, possibly because he was not a great backer of the fair like the other candidates were, and they sort of belittled him, saying, "Oh, you're just interested in beauty, you're not interested in the future of San Diego for jobs and growth and whatever." So surprisingly, he lost, even with support of some of the big names in San Diego, including John Spreckels, who owned the San Diego Union and Evening Tribune. Well, 4 years later, the mayor's elections were every 2 years. So he didn't run in 1915, but he ran in 1917 after the fair was all over. And this time he had an opponent named Lewis Wild, who was a businessman, banker. He was involved in completing the U.S. Grand Hotel downtown. And the contest quickly descended into name-calling and sloganeering, and it was probably the most exciting mayor's race in San Diego history, known today as the Smokestacks versus Geraniums campaign. Lewis Wild called himself proudly the Smokestacks candidate. He was going to bring jobs, he was going to bring industry, and his symbol was smokestacks. Factories spewing smoke was a good thing in his mind. And so he said, Marston, who's Marston? What has he done for San Diego? All he is Geranium George.
The Nolen plan had, both in the early Nolen plan, 1908, and the 1927 plan, had a lot of wonderful ideas about how the city could grow and how it should grow. And as with all plans, if there's not champions and there are not people that carry this vision out, because plans don't get done overnight, they don't get done in a week, they take years and years and years. And there wasn't that long-lasting mechanism. Nolen talked about the need to educate people and to build a consensus that is long-lasting for implementation of the plan. But politics get in the way. Administrations change. A new mayor comes in, a new city council comes in, and they must leave their mark. And unless they are bought into the idea that they're going to implement a plan from before, and their mission is to implement that plan, they want to do something over, or they don't want to do what somebody else suggested. They have to do what their own ideas were. And I think that lack of political commitment has plagued us in the city of San Diego, not only from Nolen's time, but to today. And I think the lack of educating people about what plans can do and how they work is really something that is lacking. The Burnham plan, Daniel Burnham said that his generation was never going to implement the plan, that it was going to be long-lasting. And they started a program in the Chicago elementary schools, which continued through the 50s and 60s, and maybe even be still going today. We even had a program that was started in the 30s here in San Diego that began to talk about the 1927 plan. The wars got in the way, World War I, World War II, rapid growth got in the way, focus on other parts of education changed how we think about planning and how we teach it in the elementary schools or the high schools. So all this sort of gets in the way, and each generation has to revision where they want to go and then recommit to doing whatever it is they're going to do. One of the interesting things about the Nolen plan, and well, I just mentioned it didn't always have its champions. In fact, we haven't lost sight of it. And San Diego, in some ways, is like Chicago, which is celebrating the centennial of the Burnham plan. People have not forgotten about it. And there are people who keep the flame lit over the years.
John Nolen was brought back to San Diego in 1924 by George Marston and the City Council. Lewis Wild, mayor of San Diego during the Smokestacks versus Geranium controversy, has moved on to Los Angeles by this time. Nolen brings with him Kenneth Gardner. Kenneth Gardner will assist in developing a new program to implement the original 1908 plan, but also broaden its scope. In 1926, the City Council considers and adopts a new vision for San Diego. Although it contains many of the original attributes of the 1908 plan, it also adds new recreation islands in the bay, an airport, also along the bay but near downtown, preservation of canyons, an addition of a new park system which includes Presidio Hill. John Nolen dies in 1937 at the age of 68. He's recognized as a leader of planning, and his work in San Diego, Madison, Wisconsin, Roanoke, Virginia, Venice, Florida, small towns throughout New England leave a rich legacy in city planning.